Hello, I'm Donna Lowry, a Capitol correspondent for Georgia Public Broadcasting in Atlanta. Welcome to the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young debate series. This is the runoff debate among Republican candidates for Congressional District 6. Let's meet the candidates for this debate. They are, in alphabetical order, Jake Evans is a constitutional attorney and former chair of the Georgia Ethics Commission. Dr. Rich McCormick is a veteran and emergency room physician. Now, let's meet our panelists. Rahul Bali is a politics reporter with WABE in Atlanta, and Emma Hurt is a reporter with Axios Atlanta. For complete rules on today's debate, please visit the Atlanta Press Club website, atlantapressclub.org. Now, to start the debate, each candidate will be asked one question by each panelist. Candidates have 60 seconds to answer each question. Emma Hurt, you get the first question to Jake Evans.
Mr. Evans, do you support a total ban on abortion without exceptions, including life of the mother?
So I am proudly pro-life. I am actually an only child. My mother had complications with my pregnancy, and as a result, could have no more children. So the fragility of human life is something I take very seriously. Early in my campaign, I signed the Georgia Life Alliance pledge, and I said the only exception that I do support is to save the life of the mother. I am unapologetically for ensuring that we maintain the sanctity of human life, aggressively fight against a culture of death, which I think is under attack here in the United States. I support rolling back and eliminating Roe v. Wade at the United States Supreme Court level and letting states choose, because in my opinion, we have to make sure that Christianity, the foundational principles that our country is based on, are pushed forward, because I think that will solve a lot of the major issues facing society today.
Thank you. Rahul Bali, it is your turn to ask a question of Dr. Rich McCormick.
Dr. McCormick, during your speech Saturday at the Cobb County GOP, you talked about fair choice and transparency in healthcare. You specifically mentioned pharmaceutical companies. I'm looking for specifics from you. What could Congress do about prescription prices? What legislation would you support, and what would that legislation do?
Let me first talk about what's failed, and I can tell you when Biden came out and said that he was going to limit the pricing of insulin, which is something that Trump had, and then he repealed and then brought back as if he was doing something, only benefited 10% of the people. If you want to have real policy, you have to have pricing transparency on all drugs. You have to allow fair competition in drug making. For example, you used insulin. You could buy insulin in Canada at a fraction of the cost. Why? Because they don't inflate the prices. We could buy it safely from countries that produce it, including the United States, unfettered, instead of actually artificially increasing the prices. When it comes to making drugs and pricing protections, we have a big problem. We have a middleman problem, too. That's where the big part of inflation is happening in medical health care costs. We need pricing transparency across the board, including with healthcare centers, with the access to medicine. And there's a ton of things we could do, but we need to, first of all, defeat the things that aren't working that Biden and Pelosi have instituted.
Thank you. So, Emma, it's now your turn for a question for Dr. Rich McCormick.
Dr. McCormick, do you support a total ban on abortion without exception, including life of the mother?
So as a 100% life doctor, I don't believe, and I've been in medicine for a while now, and I've delivered babies in parking lots. I've delivered babies in Haiti and in some really austere places. But I'll tell you this, I don't know of a scenario where I can have the mother die and the baby lives. I don't know of a time where it would be beneficial to kill a baby to save a mother's life. So I reject that argument to begin with. If the mother dies, the baby dies. That's how it works. As a matter of fact, if you have a trauma patient who comes in who's pregnant, delivering the baby is a good way to keep the mother alive, because the way our hemodynamic stability works. I'm 100% pro-life. I don't make exceptions because I don't believe they're contrary to each other. I believe that if you take a human life, it's never beneficial.
Thank you, Rahul. And you get the final question in this round for Jake Evans.
Mr. Evans, same event, Cobb County GOP on Saturday, and you talked about the idea of closed primaries, the idea that Republicans and Democrats would not cross over in the other party's primary. Now, this would have to go through the Georgia legislature, but the input of congressmen are very much listened to down at the state capitol. Explain to me how that's going to work. Are Georgians going to have to pick a party? When can they change before an election? Could independents pick a race? Give me the specifics on what that looks like, what you would ask legislators to do.
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. I have devoted my life to and my career to election integrity. I am the only lawyer in Georgia history to overturn 2 elections in the same race. In 2020, I fought all the way before the United States Supreme Court through the Pennsylvania trial courts to ensure that President Trump's interests were protected, that only legal votes should be counted. But unfortunately, what we had last Tuesday was we had many, many Democrats coming in, infiltrating our elections as Republicans. That is something that we didn't contemplate at the beginning of allowing an open primary system. And so what we have to do is we have to protect the integrity of our elections. How do we protect the integrity of our elections? We close our primaries, allow people to register, choose who they want to be. Unlike my opponent, who did nothing in 2020 fighting for President Trump or his own election, I fought. I fought on the front lines. I fought against the establishment, and I will continue to do that by making sure that I encourage our state legislatures to pass a closed primary system.
Dr. McCormick, rebuttal?
Yes. There's no one who suffered any more, especially on this stage, than myself. The fact that Jake has falsely accused me of not standing up for my rights. I've never conceded my race. I brought it up with the local principalities, both on the state level and the federal level. I've always stood up for voter integrity. There's never been anything fake about it. And I tell you what, the statistics, which prove that we finished 20 points ahead of my opponent, didn't matter if the Democrats are involved or not.
All right, we're going to move on. That concludes the first round of the debate. The candidates will now ask a question to their opponent. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to ask the question, 60 seconds to respond, and the candidate who asks the question will have 30 seconds for a rebuttal. Candidates will each get 2 questions, and by random selection, Dr. Rich McCormick, you may ask the first question.
Okay. Jake, you wrote a 23-page manifesto that called the criminal justice system and law enforcement racist. You even called for the police to be defunded. You claim to be conservative, but your words sound just like Democrats. You flip-flop more than Joe Biden. How can we trust you?
Well, that is one of the biggest blatant lies ever. And I'm disappointed in you for actually bringing that up at a debate here today. This paper was drafted first for a law school class 10 years ago. Rich McCormick and his campaign tried to go before the Marietta Daily Journal to try to change the facts, and you got called out about it. The Marietta Daily Journal comes forward and says, that's not true. This is a ridiculous joke to think that someone like me, who's devoted my career to protecting law enforcement, fighting for law enforcement, who has family members in law enforcement, both at the deputy sheriff level and the police level. I'm endorsed by Donald Trump. Donald Trump rejected you. He rejected you because you're bought out by special interests. You're a failed politician that has been running for 38 consecutive months. The people can't trust you. And the reason why the people can't trust you is because when you get to Washington, D.C., Rich, you'll be compromised. And the way you're trying to distract from that is bringing up a paper 10 years ago drafted into class. And it's disgusting.
Thank you. Dr. McCormick.
Jake, let me read exactly what you wrote as a lawyer, published in 2015. And I quote, your words, government must improve public education by reallocating public funding from the criminal justice system to the public education system. Those are your own words. That's defunding the police, Jake. You're a fake, and Georgians can't trust you. You can go to the website, Jake the Fake, and read it for yourself. It's what he published as a lawyer.
All right, Jake Evans, it is your turn to ask a question of your opponent.
Rich, throughout your 4-year-long campaign, you've had a loose relationship with the truth. You said you had endorsements, you didn't. You said you're all in on CD7 and flipped to CD6. And just a month ago, on this very stage, you said you didn't accept the endorsement of the Republican Main Street Partnership. Yet, you went on the John Frederick show, you admitted you met with them, you courted their endorsement, and you refused to denounce it. This is on the radio. In the last debate, I asked you, what did you say to the Republican Main Street Partnership to prove that you're centrist material? Answer the question.
Sure, I'll answer. I tell you what, I'm endorsed by a bunch of organizations and tens of thousands of voters. As a matter of fact, I got the most important endorsement of all. we had 23,000 more voters vote for me in this district than my fake opponent, Jake. I think it's important to have the endorsement of the people because they understand who a true conservative is, somebody who's lived a life of conservatism, who's always done the right thing, who's run towards the fight, who's fought for his country, who's sacrificed years away from his family to defend this great country and its conservative values. Fact is, I'm the one fighting against Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden. Jake is a fake. He's been inconsistent in what he said. He said he supports the police, but he wants to defund them. He says that he's for religious liberties, but he cheers when religious liberty bills are defeated. This guy has been inconsistent on all he said in his own writing, in his own words, in his own videos, unedited. He is the one inconsistent. The voters know who they've chosen, and that's what matters.
Jake Evans, rebuttal.
That was the best political answer I've ever heard. No answer at all. There was no answer about whether he met with him and what he said. This is exactly what you get with a failed politician who's been running for 38 consecutive months and bought out by liberal special interest. I view this race as very serious. We are in a serious state of affairs in our country. We have to elect bold, unafraid conservatives that aren't compromised and cannot be trusted by the people. You heard the answer yourself, Georgia voters of 6th District. There was no answer at all. We cannot stand or allow that to represent us.
Dr. Rich McCormick, your second question.
Jake, you claim to support law enforcement, but wrote about defunding the police. That's a fact. Those are your words. You say you fought for election integrity, but you championed mass mail-in voting in 2020. That's your words. You claim to be American first, but you want to send troops to Ukraine. On the John Frederick Show, as you say, those are your words. Jake, how can voters trust you to fight for them when you switch positions like the wind, just like Joe Biden?
Well, first, nowhere in the paper, that's a lie. I encourage everyone to read the paper that was drafted as a student. Do I say defund the police? Take a look at it. Second, I'm endorsed by President Trump. You're not. He endorsed me because he knows I fight. I fight when it matters. I fight whenever you have to go against the establishment, go against the grain, whenever the heat gets turned up. You don't. You roll with the rivers. On one day, you will be for pro-Trump. The next day, you won't. You said he hurts your campaign, yet you say you're for Trump. You say you fight, you run to the fight, you run away from the fight. You ran away from the fight to the 6th District, which I've been running since July. You ran away from the fight in 2020 whenever you allegedly would have won your election. I've overturned elections. I would have took that fight, just like I'm taking the fight for the people all the way to Washington, D.C. to ensure our values and convictions are protected.
Dr. McCormick?
Just like you, Jake, those words are fake. You wrote it. You said it. Go to the website. Check it out. He published it. It's his videos in his own words, unedited. It's his words, his writing, his publications that contradict everything that he says because he will say anything and do anything to get elected, just like the Democrats.
All right. Thank you very much. Jake Evans, your final question in this round.
Rich, more than 75% of your campaign funds come from out of the state. And more troubling, you've accepted tens of thousands of dollars from liberal special interest groups that advocate for abortion on demand, biological men competing in women's sports, critical race theory, and restricting our gun rights. These positions are dangerous to America. They're not in alignment with my principles, and they're not in alignment with the voters of Georgia 6. Are these positions in alignment with your principles? And if they're not, are you going to return the money?
Unlike you, Jake, I'm not fake. I've been consistent. I don't flip-flop on issues. I've never, ever said anything that was contradictory to pro-life, to pro-guns, to securing the border, to having good voter integrity. Those have always been my words. Those have always been my positions. All the people who support me know exactly where I stand because I don't flip-flop. That's the difference between myself and a guy who will say and do anything to get elected. There's the difference. If you want a politician, you want a slick lawyer, you got to right next to me who's fake as they get. But if you want a Marine who runs towards the fight, if you want somebody who's going to be consistently fighting against Biden and Pelosi and everything they've tried to achieve to discredit voting integrity, to make the southern border porous, to make sure we have abortion on demand, then you want a fighter who's going to stand up against those things. I've been conservative and I've been consistent in my message from the very beginning to the very end, and I always run towards the fight.
Mr. Evans, your rebuttal.
Yet again, no answer. I ask him, are you going to return the money? No answer. He swerves and just attacks. The fact of the matter is, Rich McCormick is an establishment rhino. He's a guy that's been running for 38 consecutive months in 2 different districts. He's a guy that's taken from money from just about every special interest group. AMA, look at what they stand for. Look at their agenda. Don't take my word for it. This is very serious. We have to elect people who have fought for religious liberty and won, fought for election integrity and won. There's one candidate in that race that did it, and it's me.
Thank you, sir. That concludes our second round. For those just joining us, this is the runoff debate between Republican candidates for Congressional District 6. We will now go back to the panel to ask questions to the candidate of their choice until we run out of time. And as a moderator, I have a point of privilege. I may also ask questions of the candidates. I will determine when a rebuttal is appropriate. Rahul Bali, you get the first question in this round.
Mr. Evans, I want to follow up the first round question, and here's why. Because the idea of going to closed primaries in Georgia, that's a major change for the voters in Georgia. As you've noted, you're supported by the former president, Donald Trump, and he's talking about that. I'm asking for specifics. Are you asking for Georgians to register as Republicans and Democrats or independents? And when could they change before an election? And what could independents vote in either one, or only Republicans and only Democrats? Looking for specifics on that, because it's a big change for Georgia.
Sure, and I think that's a great question. Well, I think I briefly said earlier that what we need to do is we got to protect the integrity of our elections. And unfortunately, what we have is Trump Republicans like myself, folks that are fighters the establishment doesn't like. Folks that fight for the everyday American, the establishment doesn't want in D.C. because I put the people first. I don't put liberal special interests first. And so, yes, I'm in favor, to answer your question, we need to have party registration. The majority of states outside really of the South do have party registration. As far as the permutation is specific of how far, 30 days before an election, I think they should be relatively flexible. I'm not out in any way to reduce folks from voting in a party primary of their choice. What I'm out for is ensuring Republicans elect Republicans that will represent them, that Democrats don't infiltrate, manipulate, influence our elections, which is what happened 2 Tuesdays ago. And it reduces the folks from representing the people that actually represent them at the state level or in D.C.
Thank you. Emma, you have the chance to ask a question.
This is a question for both candidates, starting with Dr. McCormick. Would you be open to any compromise gun control proposals being discussed by members of both parties in Washington right now, specifically so-called red flag laws or expanded background checks? I understand that both of you have called yourselves strong supporters of the Second Amendment.
Let's begin with you, Dr. McCormick.
Okay. I'm an ER doc, and I witness the horrors of gun violence on a regular basis. I understand that there's a mental health crisis right now in America. But I will say that taking guns out of the hands of law-abiding citizens has never been the solution. Biden and Pelosi keep on saying that they're going to make all kinds of laws and continue to take away weapons from those people, but that has not been the solution. As a matter of fact, during Biden and Pelosi's administration, you've seen an increase in gun violence and crime. In these cities that come with outrageous and very restrictive gun laws have had the worst crime. And I'll tell you, the worst part of it is, and as a guy who's traveled the world in many bad places, including Afghanistan, the Persian Gulf, Africa, the worst violence is committed by governments that have disarmed its people. And that is the origin of the Second Amendment to begin with. We need to protect our rights for law-abiding citizens and then address the other problems that are causing the gun violence.
Mr. Evans?
Well, I'm a constitutional warrior. I've built my career on fighting for our Constitution, fighting to ensure religious liberties are protected, election integrity is protected. The Second Amendment, in my opinion, is one of the most important rights that we have in this country. The ability to defend yourself, the ability to protect ourselves before and against the tyranny of government. Incrementalism is something we have to be very suspect and suspicious of, gradually eroding away our constitutional rights, including the Second Amendment, is something that I won't stand for. I will fight aggressively and unapologetically for our Second Amendment. I'm in favor of having safe communities, and I believe we have safe communities by supporting our law enforcement, giving them the tools that they need, but also ensuring that all individuals, especially in Georgia's 6th District, have the ability to arm themselves and fight against any danger, whether it is from criminals crossing our border illegally or the tyranny of government, and I will not stand down or stand back on that.
Emma, you had a follow-up?
Just to be clear, so for both of you, that's a no compromise you would consider supporting?
Well, I would have to know what the compromise is, but if it in any way unconstitutionally infringes on our Second Amendment, I would not stand for it.
Dr. McCormick?
You could talk about security of schools, you could talk about mental health, but if you're talking about taking weapons from law-abiding citizens, no.
All right. Raul, your next question.
A lot of attention, this question's for Dr. McCormick, a lot of attention, of course, on prices, inflation. But looking as a member of Congress, both two sides of this question, obviously spending, but is there a role for Congress when it comes to oversight of the Federal Reserve? Because there's been a lot of attention on the Federal Reserve. Your thoughts on that, and then, of course, fiscal policy within Congress and their spending. So I'd like to hear on both issues.
So the Federal Reserve is neither federal nor is it a reserve, if you understand the background of that institution and how it affects our economy and how it affects our taxation and debt. Indeed, if you look at China, it has 3 times the debt that we do, but they don't pay interest on it. Big difference. If you look at the regulation and control of our government over our policies, every time they increase regulation, it increases the inflation. Right now, we have a huge glut of regulation that has caused huge raises in energy costs. Right now, people have to decide between filling their gas tank and buying food or medication. These are policies that are directly coming from the President of the United States, Joe Biden, and his failed policies. He's the one that's created a big part of this inflation by his regulation. Overspending is the other big part of this. And of course, the Federal Reserve is going to play in this as far as what we owe and what our children owe into the future.
All right. Emma, you have the next question to one candidate, please.
Mr. Evans, does former President Trump bear any responsibility for the storming of the Capitol on January 6th?
Well, I want to make very clearly, and I've made this clear throughout my campaign, which is that one of the first acts that I want to do if I'm blessed enough to represent the voters of Georgia 6 is disband the January 6th Commission. The January 6th Commission is now being used as nothing but a political weapon against conservatives. There are conservatives throughout Georgia, throughout the country, that are being denied their due process right to a speedy and fair trial. That's something that I'll unapologetically stand up to fight against. We have to make sure that conservative voices throughout this country are protected, that conservative voices throughout this country have an ability to be heard. We have to make sure that liberal special interests, which are buying out politicians throughout Georgia, throughout this 6th District, and throughout this country, are eliminated. Campaign finance is something, in addition, that I stand for, reform that I stand for. But we have to elect bold, unafraid conservatives in this country to represent our people because the institutions are stacked against us. We cannot allow liberal interests to control politicians like they did Joe Biden.
Thank you, gentlemen. That is all the time we have for questions. Each candidate will now have 60 seconds for a closing statement. And Jake Evans, you get the first closing statement.
The contrast in this race cannot be more clear. One candidate is a bought out by liberal special interest, failed politician. And the other candidate is a next generation, bold, unafraid conservative with a record of fighting for our conservative values and is endorsed by leading conservatives like President Donald J. Trump. I have built my career fighting for election integrity, religious liberties, going against the grain, taking down corrupt, powerful politicians as state ethics chairman. My opponent is bought out 75% by out-of-state money, bought out by liberal special interest groups which support gun control and abortion on demand. I take this race very seriously because I believe we are in the fight for the heart, soul, fabric of America. We and I cannot allow a compromised candidate to get to Washington, D.C., who's going to fold and kowtow to the left and the D.C. establishment. Jake Evans will fight for you, not the status quo.
Thank you. Dr. Rich McCormick, please give your closing statement.
I'm Dr. Rich McCormick. I'm a Marine helicopter pilot, an ER doc, a husband, and a father of 7. In the emergency room and in combat zones, I make tough decisions in tough places. That's what leaders do. Georgia needs real leadership experience. Real leaders say what they mean and do what they say. Georgia needs conservatives with real leadership experience. We are sick of fake politicians who will do or say anything to get elected. Fake politicians like Jake Evans. This is a guy who said he backs our police, but writes a manifesto about defunding them because they're racist. He says he's for religious freedom, but then cheers when the religious liberty bill is defeated. He's on record trashing President Trump, praising Abrams and Pelosi, and advocating for troops in Ukraine, and then denies it. These are his words, not mine. America's in trouble. You do have a clear choice. When you're in trouble, can you turn to a Marine or an ER doc or to a slick, fake politician?
Thank you very much, gentlemen. That concludes our debate. We'd like to remind voters that Election Day is Tuesday, June 21st, and early voting begins on June 11th. Our thanks to the candidates and to our panelists of journalists. We'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging today's debate. For more information about debates that will host this election season, visit atlantapressclub.org. I'm Donna Lowry. Thanks for joining us for the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series.